One question has probably changed my life more than any other. It's also one of the simplest. Where's the evidence? Not because I don't trust people, but because I've realized how easily we mistake interpretation for truth. Someone tells us something often enough, we hear it from people we respect, or we have one powerful emotional experience, and before we know it, we've turned an opinion into a fact. Then we begin living as though it couldn't possibly be any other way. The way I currently understand the game is this: we're all unique, just like our fingerprints. Each of us experiences life differently, has different gifts, different interests, different ways of seeing the world. For me, the fingerprint is the evidence that the purpose of life isn't to become the same. Perhaps it's to rediscover the unique expression we came here to be. The challenge is that, as children, we inherit thousands of ideas before we're able to question them. What's safe? What's dangerous? What's possible? Who we are? How success works? How relationships work? What makes us worthy? Most of those ideas aren't examined, they're simply absorbed. Then something fascinating happens. We become teenagers. Suddenly, we question everything. We test boundaries. We challenge rules. Adults often call it rebellion. I've started wondering whether it's something much more intelligent. What if adolescence is life's way of gathering evidence? Evidence that many of the assumptions we inherited aren't universally true. Think about it. How many teenagers stayed out too late, didn't get enough sleep, ate badly, lived dangerously, ignored all the advice they were given, and somehow discovered that life didn't immediately fall apart? I'm not suggesting we ignore good advice. I'm suggesting we become curious. Because somewhere in those years, we begin collecting evidence that life isn't as rigid as we'd been led to believe. Then adulthood arrives. We become busy. We take on responsibilities. We stop questioning. We start assuming. And that's where one simple question becomes incredibly powerful. Where's the evidence? Not, can I find one example? Because we can find evidence for almost anything. Instead ask, is this true for every human being? Let's take something as ordinary as sleep. Search online for the best way to sleep, and you'll quickly discover hundreds of confident opinions. Sleep on your back. No, sleep on your side. Don't eat after a certain time. The room must be 18 degrees. You need blackout blinds. You need this pillow, that mattress. 8 hours, 9 hours, blue light, no blue light. The advice never seems to end. Now ask a different question. Is every healthy, thriving person sleeping exactly the same way? Of course not. Which means something important. These aren't universal truths, they're possibilities. The same applies to business, relationships, health, money, success, confidence, visibility. The moment you discover that something isn't universally true, you've discovered possibility. That's incredibly liberating, because it means your life doesn't have to follow someone else's formula. Then comes the second question. Does this resonate with me? Not, should I do this? Not, what does everyone else recommend? But, does this feel coherent with who I'm becoming? I believe we have an extraordinary guidance system built into us. It's called resonance. When something is deeply aligned, it expands us. We breathe more deeply. We become curious. We feel energized. The thought of it makes us feel free and expansive, not because it's easy, but because it feels true. Resistance can still appear, but don't immediately assume resistance means stop. Sometimes resistance is simply an old program asking to be questioned. That's why I love asking, where's the evidence? Is this fear based on something that's universally true, or is it simply an old conclusion I've never revisited? So what's the takeaway? I've found 3 questions incredibly helpful. Where's the evidence? Is this universally true, or simply evidence that something is possible? And finally, does this resonate with who I'm becoming? Because evidence creates possibility. Resonance creates direction. And when those two begin working together, life becomes far less about following someone else's rules and much more about discovering your own. And here's a final observation. Every unquestioned belief becomes a boundary. Every questioned belief becomes a doorway.